Your fonts are imported, and now it's time to start building your subtitles for your videos. Fun fact, this is the exact topic that helped my YouTube channel blow up. I made a video about how to easily edit gaming subtitles, and it has been watched by over 1.5 million people. If you're one of those people, then thank you. I wouldn't be here without you. This part of the course is essentially my revised 2.0 version of subtitle editing, and I'm really excited to share these techniques with you because honestly, editing subtitles is the bane of my life. I used to spend hours and hours editing subtitles when it could have been so much easier, but subtitles are just really important. You can use them to add comedy to a video or to make a point clearer, and having subtitles can just help with the accessibility of your content. So in this module, we're not only going to go over how to make subtitles in Premiere, but we're going to make your text pop in like this. It's a technique that will add flair to your videos and familiarize you with Premiere along the way. These are the kinds of subtitles that you see everywhere on large-scale content. I'm talking YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, and TikTok. It's really easy to read, it's visually engaging, and if you don't have audio on your phone, it's a lifesaver. So let's begin. To start, you're going to want to simply press T on the keyboard to bring up the text cursor. Click anywhere in the playback window. It really doesn't matter right now. And then you should have the option to type some text. And let's type something out. Fantastic. We now have some very basic text on the window, and you should also have created a text file on your timeline down here, which is 5 seconds by default. Click somewhere on the timeline so that we're no longer typing, and then press V on the keyboard so that the cursor turns back to normal. We can now drag the text around the playback window to our desired position, and if you hold Control on Windows or Command on Mac, the text will automatically lock into these red guidelines, which equate to the center of the screen. You can also change the size and rotation of the text by using these handles here. I don't really recommend changing the rotation of the text, as it's just hard for the viewer to read, but there are potential moments where that could be a stylistic choice. At the end of the day, do whatever works for you. Now that we have our basic text centered and sized, it's time for the good stuff. Select the text again by either clicking on the text in the background window or the text box on the timeline, and then head up to the Effect Controls panel. You can now see that there are multiple trays with multiple options to adjust. For now, click on the one labeled text if it's not already open, and you should get a drop-down filled with variables. It looks like something out of Microsoft Word's options, and it works in a very similar way. So the first thing, there's a button here called Central Alignment that you can press. This will centralize the selected text and change its position to the center if it's not already there. This will be really helpful for duplicating text files, as it will keep all of your subtitles in the middle of the frame, even if you change the size of the text. Just make sure you drag it back to those center lines if it's out of place after selecting it. With central alignment selected, let's go and choose the font you want to use. This should already be installed from the last module, and it's in this little window here where you can look through your fonts. Remember, if you can't see your installed font and you haven't restarted Premiere since installing the font, then that's why you're not seeing it. Save your work with Ctrl and S or Command and S and restart your software. Once you've selected your font, you'll see the text change to your chosen font. If this doesn't work, then click off the text and then click back onto it, and it should redo those changes. It's a minor bug that certain versions of Premiere have, but it's nothing that you'll need to be resetting your project for. Just be aware that you need to check that it's actually changed to that desired font. So our text is looking a bit basic, and here's where we start playing with some of the variables in that text tab. Your text should be white by default, but if you want it to be a different color, just press the color next to fill and choose your desired color. White is by far the safest option and the one that I'll be using for this example. Below fill, we have stroke. Tick the box to give your text an outline, and then change the color by hitting this colored block and choosing your color. To the right of the color, there's the variable, which should be set to 4. You can change this simply by clicking and holding the number and dragging up and down. You can also type in the size by clicking on the number. The size you want is down to your personal preference, but I normally set my stroke to black and have the size as 10. There's also the option to add drop shadow. Just tick the box next to drop shadow and your options will appear, and you can once again change them to suit your preferences. Drop shadow is really useful as it makes the text so much clearer and easier to read, all the while being quite a subtle effect. I also highly recommend changing the color from the default gray to black, as the grade just looks slightly off. This is a good time to set your text in the position that you want it to be for the rest of the video. I normally have my subtitles about 1/4 of the way up the screen. If not, then 1/3 of the way up. It's just a really natural place for the subtitle to go and doesn't get in the way of the action on the screen. And with that, your first subtitle is looking pretty good. But let's add that pop-in effect. Within the text panel, you should see some movement controls that you can change. These are the variables we're going to change, not the motion control effects or any other tabs in the effect controls panel. So please, make sure you're changing the right variables. In fact, it might just be easier if we collapse all these other motion controls so that we don't accidentally do the wrong thing. Just click these buttons here to do exactly that. Now that we're working on the correct variables, let's start making our pop-in effect.
You'll see the scale option here, which has changed as we change the size of our text. I'm going to round this up to 240.
Click the little compass to create a keyframe, and your keyframe will pop up, just like when we created keyframes in the other module for zooming. What you want to do is move 4 frames forward and create another keyframe by clicking the button again. Then move forward another 3 frames and create a 3rd keyframe. Remember that you can use the directional keys on your keyboard to move a single frame forward at a time. Right now, that's going to be really useful. And it's worth noting that there are 2 arrow pointers next to the keyframe creator button. By clicking on these arrows, you'll be taken to the nearest keyframe in that direction. This is really handy when you want to cycle through existing keyframes.
Now let's go back to that first keyframe. Change the value of the scale to 180. Then click the arrow pointing to the right to bring us to the second keyframe, the one that's 4 frames ahead. Change the value of the scale to 260. Press that arrow again, and the final keyframe should return you to the desired size. In our case, that's 240. Let's watch that back.
And hey, that's some nice pop-in. You can have more drastic pop-in, slower pop-in, faster pop-in, bigger pop-in, smaller pop-in, all just by playing with the position of the keyframes and the scale of those keyframes. What I've made with you today is what I personally use on nearly all of my projects, and it really helps add that special sauce to your videos. And before you start panicking that this took ages and that you don't have enough time to change all these settings on all of the text in your video, stop right there. I've got your back. Simply hold down the Alt or Option key and then drag the text file along the timeline. This will create a duplicate of the text with all the settings, including the pop-in effect. So double-click the text in the playback window and change it to whatever you want it to say. And here you have the new text with all your awesome settings and information. This is why it was so important to hit that central alignment button earlier, because you'll notice that it doesn't matter how much text you'll put into these copies, it's always centered. And now for one final tip that will really help you in the long term. We're going to make a preset. A preset is essentially a bunch of saved settings that you can drag and drop onto something in Premiere, and that something will adopt those settings. For instance, I have presets for transitions, animations, camera shakes, and loads more. I'll go into presets in much more detail in a later module, but for now I'm going to show you how to turn the work we've just done into a preset so that you can drag and drop those settings onto any text in any future projects too. To do this, right-click on the Text tab. That's the one we've just been playing around in, and the only one that should be open right now. Once you've right-clicked, you'll have the option to Save as Preset. Click that button, and a new window will appear with your saving options. Change the name of your preset to whatever suits the preset. In this case, I'm calling it Text Pop-In. And make sure that this preset is set to the Anchor to Endpoint setting. This will just keep it at the beginning of every single piece of text you drop it onto. Hit save, and now whenever you open a new project and want text with this pop-in effect, you can simply drag and drop this preset onto your text. Later, I'll go into more detail in where your presets are stored so that you can find these easily. Bam! You've not only added awesome subtitles, but created your first preset. You're really making progress, and I'm proud of you. Just be sure to always save your work with Control and S or Command and S. You don't want to lose all that progress, do you? Good. Of course, all that being said, you don't just have to use the text tool for subtitles. There are so many uses for text in video. Perhaps you want to say something on the screen that's not being said out loud, or you want text that establishes a chapter name, or maybe a list. The possibilities of what text can do and what you want to add are endless. And using what I've shown you here, you can play around with text to your heart's content. If you just have text in the timeline and nothing else, then the background will be black by default. But if you wanted a different color on the background to help your text pop, for example, then there's an easy way to do that.
Just click that little page icon in the project panel and select Color Matte. With the eyedropper, pick the color that you want the background to be, and then hit OK. Your color matte is now in your project panel.
Simply drag and drop that onto the timeline below your text and you'll have a colorful background. And if you're not quite happy with the selected color, just double click on the color matte in the project window and then the color options will appear again. This is a really easy way to just play around with the colors of your color matte. And remember, if you have text on screen, make sure it's above the color matte in the timeline. And those are some of the basics of adding text and backgrounds in Premiere Pro. Again, have a play around, and in the next section we'll go into how to track your text onto an object or person, which will be another hugely useful and transferable skill.